was actively saying space is a warfighting domain. Make no mistake about it. Space is contested. Space is threatened. Our capabilities in space are under attack and are threatened.
Welcome to Cocktails and Socktails, the podcast where we make cyber relevant to everyone and unlock the stories of our leading industry professionals. I'm Megan.
And I'm Carley, and on today's show, we're talking to retired Major General Kim Crider, who during her 35-year military career served as the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer for the U.S. Space Force and the Chief Data Officer for the U.S. Air Force. She also spent several years in the private sector building two specialty consulting firms that advise clients in the education, engineering, cybersecurity, financial services, and healthcare technology industries about enterprise IT management strategies, data administration, and digital services. To say that is a lot. It's a lot, but amazing. And so, Kim, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So exciting to be here.
Now, I know I unpacked a lot in those few statements that I made about you, but can you kind of tell us who you are, how you got to where you are?
Sure.
I mean, I guess I know like a high level. I mean, that's a lot to
As much
unpack, but
detail as you would like, because I, for one, am very interested.
yeah.
Carly and I, we do data day in and day out, and your background, data was very buzzy in there, and so I'm interested in hearing as much detail as you want to provide.
Okay, well, long and windy road, I'll say that. I started out in the Air Force as a brand new second lieutenant. My first job, my first real job was in the Air Force. I came out of ROTC. I was a, product of ROTC, Duke University, go Duke, and went in to the Air Force as an acquisition officer and an engineer with an engineering background. Through the course of my career, I never really had a script. I kind of rolled with the punches and took advantage of every opportunity that came along. I really didn't think I was going to make a 35-year career out of the military at the start of it all. I enjoyed what I was doing so much. However, there's so many leadership opportunities presented to young people that come into the service. It's a great place to get started. It's a great place to learn how to lead. It's a great place to learn about applying technology at very large scale to solve some really important problems. And I was energized by all of that, and just kept re-upping, as it were, into new opportunities. I did make an important kind of strategic move about 8 years into my career, where I decided to leave active duty and go into the reserves. So I went from full-time, regular Air Force active duty acquisition officer to part-time reserve officer, now focused primarily on communications and operational level comm. And I moved to Hawaii. So I had an opportunity to go to Hawaii and become a reservist. And while I was in Hawaii, because I was only part-time Air Force for a good portion of that, I was able to do some other things in industry, which kind of started me on a path to kind of a parallel path of being a military officer and a military leader in technology and operations, and also a civilian in the commercial industry, learning about technology and my ability to apply technology to help organizations. So that parallel path served me well throughout both of my careers, because I was able to bring one set of insights and experiences to each side, right? From a military standpoint, I could bring leadership and large, massive scale capabilities and applications of technology to solve really critical problems to an industry scenario, which for the most part was, much smaller, but still could be very large in terms of an industry level enterprise. But being able to bring those insights into, how does this really need to scale and play out in industry, and what are some of the leadership and cultural challenges that you need to think through, and vice versa. On the industry side, I would get a lot of knowledge about what's up and coming, what are the latest technology trends, where is industry headed, how is industry creating value, significant competitive advantage from these technological advancements, how could I bring that knowledge into the military? So in my military career, I could offer new ideas, new approaches, new ways of thinking about things that, when you're in an organization that's very focused on keeping things even keeled and steady and standardized to a large extent, but constantly trying to innovate itself and find that right balance, I would always kind of bring an outside perspective. So that dual path served me very well. In industry, of course, I became very familiar with where industry was going with cybersecurity, the application of cyber. On the government side, I was very involved in the ground floor of what are some of the cyber operational challenges that have existential concerns, and how do we address those organizationally? So there was that, sort of dual relationship. Then as technology continued to evolve, there was the evolution of the importance of data and the importance of analytics and AI, the early stages of AI in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, where we really, in industry, starting to think about how do you think about using automation? How do you think about using computer vision technologies in new ways, and bringing some of those insights into the military? The military was doing massive scale movement of capabilities to the cloud. Industry was doing cloud too, but certainly not at the scale of the government. Once the government started to move in that direction with more emphasis, and I could bring those points to industry. Yeah, cloud is really important. We're all seeing it important, but here's what it means when you go really large, worldwide, global enterprise level cloud. So all of that kind of put me in a position on both sides to, be somewhat of a unicorn, if you will, somebody who was like a little bit different than everybody else, because I had two worlds that I was operating in. And very specifically, when the Air Force was looking to establish a chief data office, the very first data office in the DoD, and have a chief data officer, the Air Force specifically asked me as a reservist. By this point, I was a general officer in the reserves, if I would be willing to come on full time to help stand up this office, to help the Air Force really figure out how it would leverage data as a strategic advantage, as a strategic asset, given my industry experience. And I said, yes, I will absolutely do that. Came on board, set that up, worked around the world with every major Air Force command, including Air Force Space Command at the time, on how do you really best leverage your data. We hired a full-time civilian into that position of chief data officer. And then I was asked by the then Air Force Command commander, General Raymond, who later became the first chief of space operations. But I was asked by General Raymond at the time, will you come out to Colorado and help us in the space community really figure out how to leverage space data from space? We really need to understand the space domain. We only understand the space domain by the data we can receive from it, and we do not leverage our data as effectively as we could, nor apply any real analytics to it. So will you come out and help us figure out how to do that? I said yes. I went to Colorado from DC, spent a few years then helping them do that, get their data strategy, data architecture, data office stood up. And while I was out there, all the other things relative to space in our national security apparatus started to change when the administration at the time said, we really need a U.S. Space Command to really focus on protecting and defending assets in space. And we need a U.S. Space Force, a separate service, to organize, train, and equip capability to employ by U.S. Space Command. I was there in Colorado when all that was happening. I was one of a handful of senior leaders at the time, the most senior reservist at the time, now a 2-star general. And I was asked to really help get all this stood up and be part of the stand-up of the Space Force. And because of my background in data, analytics, cyber, IT infrastructure at large scale, when the Space Force stood up, I was then asked by General Raymond, as he moved on to be the chief of space operations, will you come back to DC for a couple of years to help us stand up this Chief Technology Innovation Office for the Space Force and be responsible for laying out our plans and our strategies, and our focus on Space Force, this new service, as a digital service. How do we leverage digital technologies, and how do we really leverage industry most effectively, especially the small tech startup community that's bringing a lot of innovation to advance our operations in space, and our ability not just to leverage data, but to analyze it, to apply AI, and to accelerate all of our capabilities. So I did that. And so in a nutshell, it was a little bit of right place, right time, a lot of making myself available and open to new things, new ideas, new capabilities, running these parallel paths very effectively, and a little bit of luck, and it all worked out.
That's amazing. I mean, as a like female who was in the Army, did ROTC myself, like to hear your story and just like the successes that you've had and just like blazing the trail for females after you, et cetera, like however that looks, like it just, I mean, it warms my heart for like, it just makes me very excited and like even more excited to like speak to you because, you know, there could have been plenty of opportunities where it wasn't you that was asked to do this. You might have been the best person, but it might not have been you. And so I think that's incredible. So thank you for all you, and I mean, it's just so much, right? Like everything that you just said is just so much. Um, Before I ask you about to like what you do today, how important, because as Megan and I are like data lovers, like how important is it to include data strategy and data protection into the overall security picture?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I mean, everything that we do, especially in current day, using current technologies, current digital approaches, our ability to operate, whether it's commercially or from a government standpoint, very effectively in our competitive environments, is going to be based on our ability to accelerate our use of data. I mean, data is in fact the asset that can give us strategic advantage if we can really leverage it, harness it, and use it in a way to gain some new insights into where the real opportunities are, where the competition is, where the threats are, and how do we maneuver effectively in a highly competitive environment. And so you need data to do that. And we're becoming more and more familiar with and excited about the ability to leverage artificial intelligence, and these specific models that can act on the data, can learn from the data, can be trained by the data, can do things that humans would normally do, or that humans can't do, don't want to do. It's too dangerous to do. But yet, if machines can do it using data and leveraging data very effectively, then here again, we can create some competitive advantage to be able to operate and work in areas ahead of our competitors, ahead of our adversaries. So we need data. Well, clearly, if we rely on that data so much, we have some dependency on it, it's going to be subject to attack. It's going to be subject to compromise, or it's going to be incomplete, right? We're always going to want more. We're always going to want better. We're always going to need better, faster, more complete, more assured availability of data to maintain the advantages that we seek. And our enemies, our competitors, our adversaries, will do what they can to undercut that. So we've got to be able to protect it. We've got to be able to secure it. It goes hand in hand.
So I have a question about, because this is my first conversation with someone about space data, and I had to kind of wrap my head around this a little bit, and maybe you could help me. When we think about, and I think maybe prior to this point, I had always been into the impression that space data was like, there was a scientific community and that it was sort of open source in the sense that if you had access to the technology to perform the collections, that it would be a community of sharing in order to advance, technological advancements where space would be concerned. But then the more I started thinking about this, and because Carley and I support DoD, our thinking is always from the perspective of national security. And then it was like, well, am I missing the aspect where we look at this as space as an attack vector? And if so, then how much of that data becomes guarded, so to speak? And what role would, and we haven't asked about your company yet, which that's really the next step, is asking about your company. I think I beat Carley to the punch, but
no, I knew you were going to have a question about everything she just said before we jumped into diving deeper. So
I want to hear about if your company is contributing in that way in national security, and if so, what's something that you would challenge people to think about from a security perspective when we're considering space as an attack vector, and how is your company enabling solutioning on that front?
Yes, absolutely. And it's very important that we walk down this path by first and foremost talking about the threats, the environment that we need to be able to operate in, the importance of space before we talk about, my company specifically or any company and what we are able to do. Because that it all emanates from, well, what are the problems that need to be solved? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Why now? Why do we need to be able to be thinking about this? And there's a lot of reasons for that. We started in 2017, 2018 timeframe when I first went out to Air Force Space Command, and we were really trying to figure out how best to leverage data. Right around that timeframe, we were actively, the U.S. government, the military, the Air Force at the time, because Space Force was a part of Air Force, it was Air Force Space Command, was actively saying space is a warfighting domain. Make no mistake about it. Space is contested. Space is threatened. Our capabilities in space are under attack and are threatened. And we're vulnerable. And we need to be mindful of that. We need to be prepared for that. We need to be out in front of that. Why is space at risk? Why is space so important? Well, when you think about the capabilities that we have in space, that we've had in space for such a long time, even before this really rapidly growing, burgeoning space economy, commercial space economy, we've become more and more, as a U.S. military in particular, and with our allies, dependent on communications from space and imagery from space to understand better what's happening on the Earth and where there are potential threats, where there are, potential missile launches, where those launches could be coming from, where those launches could be going to. We use position, navigation, and timing from space that not only facilitates and enables our military operations in terms of effective positioning and navigation, precision guided munitions, et cetera, but also provides really critical timing so that our systems can run and operate and be synchronized with the appropriate timing. And of course, there's a reason why the US government and the United States Space Force now operates those large satellites that provide position, navigation, and timing, which is the basis for GPS technology. The reason why we do it is because it's so critical to us. And we don't, all of our major industry sectors depend on the availability of position, navigation, and timing. Our economy runs on position, navigation, and timing. When you think about financial transactions, right? Emergency services, transportation, aviation, timing is so critical. So we got to be
driving to the grocery store in a
right.
new town,
right. We got to be able to protect that stuff. And our enemies, our adversaries, recognize that these are, this can be a soft underbelly if we're not protecting it. It certainly is vulnerable to cyber attack. It's vulnerable to jamming. Jamming is a very common occurrence. Some of that jamming is, adversarially driven. Some of it is environmentally driven. There are threats. There's more congestion in the domain with a growth in commercial communication satellites and other small sat capabilities going into space, launches of large constellations of satellites. It's creating more traffic, more debris, potentially more danger. So we have to be able to understand this domain. And we, the US government, the US military, United States Space Force in particular, has to be able to provide the assets that can really, really understand what's happening in the domain. And from that domain of the highest high ground, what's happening on Earth for our national interests as a nation and in support of our allies around the world. So space is absolutely critical. Space is a threat. The data that we need about what's happening in space and where all this potential risk and threat is needs to be well understood so that we can effectively maneuver and manage and protect our assets, and then being able to ensure that those assets can operate uninterruptedly to be able to support operations on the ground or in any other domain. That's why space is so critical. That's why data about space is so critical. There is a lot of information sharing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we certainly share information with our allies and international partners. Commercial companies are now sharing information about threats to space, in space, about space. But of course, there are levels of protection. There are levels of sharing. There are levels of security and levels of releasability of that data for the purposes of protecting our national interests, just like we would in any other domain. So it's way different than it was when space was a benign environment and it was just a few handful of satellites up there, just kind of keeping an eye on, maybe doing some monitoring of the Earth, but we had we were more reliant on other forms of monitoring or other forms of communication. It's way different now. So hopefully that's helped to paint a picture of what's changed and why it's so important. My company was established, just to sort of get to Elara Nova. My company was established to help industry and government and partners around the world come together and figure out how to bring the best capabilities to bear to enhance the space environment, to enhance space security, to enhance and enable space sustainability and a vibrant space economy. So we really look at all facets of that. Of course, we're very interested and concerned about global security relative to securing space and its ability to support capabilities in other domains from a national security perspective, because many of us come from the national security environment. We are a team of experts that have had decades of experience and careers in the U.S. military, working military space operations, national intelligence community, national intelligence space, commercial space. Individuals on my team have spent their careers, the majority of their careers, in executive positions in commercial industry, developing space capabilities and providing those space capabilities to the government, but now more and more to other industry partners or in support of other commercial endeavors and civil space. So, Space Commerce Office and NASA, and for the purposes of exploration and scientific endeavor. So we are a team of experts that come from all of those different communities. And we work, again, as consultants, as advisors. We advise on strategy. We advise on market positioning. We advise on investments. We advise on policy, all the things that are needed to further the ability to more effectively leverage space. We advise on technology. I come at it for a lot from the technology integration, technology advancement perspectives. How do we leverage all of this capability most effectively to continue to enhance and advance life on Earth and activities? And in the future, there will be more and more sustained life in space as we see, more space-based platforms for any number of things that we can see coming into the future. So it's all about making space available, accessible, usable, and protected to be able to support all of the things that we need to be able to do.
I think that's very interesting, especially because even just like with what I'm involved in, what I've been involved in my life, most people like still think of space in the benign sense that you mentioned, from a space exploration, going to the moon, the space station, seeing, from a scientific perspective. But it can be a very vulnerable layer because of all the satellites and the like how heavily we are dependent on communications and that access and those satellites connecting communications that, in a sense, some of the stuff we've talked about before, like, World War IV is going to be sticks and stones. It might be taking out satellites and making a whole country black,
Well, we
or
saw it in Ukraine. We saw the
yeah.
perfect, example of what we've been saying play out at the early stages of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, right? The very first thing Russia did, even before they had a land invasion into Ukraine, was a cyber attack
Yeah.
against space communication systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a denial of service of satellite-based communications that the Ukrainians relied upon. And we saw that happen. And so that kind of proved the point. Space is vulnerable. Space, is important. And if it gets attacked by any number of means, taken out, it can create some real problems.
On our pre-call, we talked about AI, and we specifically wanted to get into AI where it intersects space. I'm curious, from your perspective, AI is obviously an enabler, a technology enabler. What is the balance there? AI as a kind of a threat vector, like in normal like cybersecurity, we talk about like generative AI in particular, having the ability to create confusion, conflict. You brought up the Ukrainian Russia conflict, that we know that kind of the premise of misinformation and how easy it is to, spread that. We have AI as a threat vector, and then we have AI as a technology enabler to potentially protect against some of these threats. Like, where's the balance of that? And how do you kind of navigate that from a space perspective? Like, are there any examples you can provide of kind of one side or the other?
Well, I mean, I think you're hitting on a lot of things, Megan. There's definitely a growing understanding of the value of artificial intelligence, and generative AI has really um, accelerated that, interest and appreciation for, wow, we can leverage artificial intelligence models to do things, faster, more effectively, with more information than humans can, and in some ways can, create results that, are beyond human ability to do. And that can have significant advantages, of course, right? If machines can do some things that we just can't do, or it can do it operating on more data more quickly than humans can, it can create real advantages for us. But it can also create some real danger, because if machines can do some things that deceive us, or cause us to, take action in ways that we aren't necessarily in our best interest, and that could be very problematic. And so this is the other thing that people are starting to, kind of scratch their heads about with regards to AI. That, wow, AI can create threats, and can really deceive and spoof us into thinking something is real when it's not. Right? Misinformation, disinformation. We've seen that. Deep fakes. Right? The ability for generative AI to generate images of people that looks like this is really real. This is like, the three of us talking here, but are we really real? Are we really the ones that are sharing this information? And is what's coming out of my mouth, really my original thought? It can be problematic from a space-based perspective, because we rely on data, we rely on information to be able to understand what's really happening in the domain. We want our sensors. You don't want our sensors to be deceived into, seeing something that's not really there, or portraying something and us not having an ability to really ascertain, is that real? And so we've got to be able to really have ways to kind of counter that, or authenticate what information we are getting, and how valid is it. Of course, that there's a variety of different techniques to do that. some of that is driven by AI, right? Sometimes you need certain models to kind of look for the fallacy or the fakeness of what a generative AI solution might be creating, right? Which is why there's going to be this battle of models that goes on that says, okay, this model is going to look to try to create something that's fake. This model is going to look for all the potential hints of something being fake. Which one is going to win? They're each going to try to learn from each other, because the model that's trying to create something fake is going to try to learn about what other models might pick up so that it can make itself better, right? And have a greater ability to thwart some kind of a ability to see that they're being deceptive. So it's going to go back and forth. And this is just going to be the mode that we're in. For humans, I think it causes all of us to take a step back and go, well, wait a minute, I can't trust anything, really. I've got to have a way to verify what it is that I'm looking at. We're now more and more into this mode of zero trust. Zero trust has become a kind of an established way of thinking in the IT cybersecurity models of, just don't blatantly trust that anybody has access to any information. You've got to validate who they are and authenticate who they are before you authorize them access to information. Well, and that goes for machines too. We've got to validate that this machine has access to this application before we enable access. Well, now we've got to validate the data itself and verify that this data is really true, truthful, original, valid information about what our understanding is. And if it's not, we need to be able to uncover that so that we can at least in the best case say, okay, that's not 100% validated, so we know that there's some questionable verification of it. However, we can make our decisions based on that better understanding versus being completely fooled by something. So hopefully that's helpful. I mean, AI has a huge amount of benefit, but it also has a lot of risk, and it just causes us now to be much smarter when we develop the models, when we are using the data, that we're much more careful and assuring that what we're doing has a certain amount of confidence associated with it.
So one of the things that you said, or you kind of talked around, that the first question that pops into my mind is there a risk of AI generated data, or you referenced deep fake data being generated that is made to be perceived as though it is coming from space? I mean, like, is there an intentional deception as like an
We haven't
attack
seen that
vector?
yet. To my knowledge, we haven't specifically seen that particular example of faking, a source from space about space, but it could happen. It could
Not to
certainly
put
happen.
any ideas out there. Don't do that.
I mean, our adversaries are always thinking. So it hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge, but that doesn't mean it won't, or that it isn't. But to my knowledge, we haven't seen that as much as what we are seeing. Of course, what we're all very familiar with is deep fakes of information that's generated from the internet. I mean, because quite frankly, you've got to have access to a lot of data to be able to create something fake, right? So if I were to say to my Chat GPT application, give me a picture of somebody that looks like Megan, and we're doing a sock tales and cocktails interview on a Friday afternoon. Well, the internet's going to go scrape a bunch of pictures of people that look like you, and it's going to create you with headsets doing something, and people might think that, oh wow, there she is, she's doing that. I didn't know she was doing that today, when you're really not. You're really doing something else.
I'm gonna say, like, our mutual friend Robert is working on how to get Chat GPT to basically be him, use his voice to clone to speak the answers, and then just have his face there. And I'm like, you're just trying to get out of meetings. That's what you're trying to do.
There's that too.
But I mean, I feel like that's going to be the next thing we see with something like that. But it really, I mean, you've got the goodness that generative AI or the tools that are created to advance technology or society, but there's always somebody out there who, this is why we can't have nice things, that's going to try exploit that or use it for nefarious reasons. And so we have to constantly be thinking about how to be ahead of the adversary. So
Exactly.
along that
Exactly.
line, from a space exploration, information gathering perspective, what is something that's critical from a cybersecurity perspective for protecting from such things occurring?
Yeah, I mean, from a cybersecurity perspective, again, space is essentially a lot of software-based systems on orbit, far away, connected to people on the ground via some sort of communications link, right? So there's a lot of vulnerability in there, end-to-end system when it comes to the potential to be compromised, because it's a communication to and from those satellites, not and it's the data from those satellites that's providing a specific service. Any of that can be impacted. Space is essentially space-based systems are essentially compromised of four major components. It's the on-orbit system itself. It's the ground system that controls that asset and makes sure that it's where it needs to be and is operating. It's the link between the ground and space, and it's the human, right? It's the users of information or the users of those ground systems that are controlling those satellites. So any one of those things can be compromised from a cybersecurity perspective. And so there are, cybersecurity measures that are taken to protect them, right? Encryption and, kind of standard protections that we're very familiar with, zero trust kind of approaches, dealing with, insider threats and, kind of training people on how to, properly utilize these systems from a cybersecure perspective. All of that comes into play. Another big concern for space systems is supply chain, and really having a verifiable supply chain of components that are put together to comprise these capabilities. Because once they're on orbit, if you've got some anomalous set of software malware in your system on orbit, that could be very problematic. And so supply chain is a really critical piece.
That is so
And of course,
interesting.
we're doing more and more to identify ways of having ways to identify anomalies in the system. Again, gathering data. How is the system normally supposed to be working? Applying, models and machine learning algorithms to say, okay, this is normal behavior. These are anomalies in the behavior. What's causing those anomalies? Is that anomaly potentially being, the result of some sort of a cyber-based compromise within the software? And if it is, do we have a way to isolate that? Do we have a way to correlate that to other things that we see going on so that we can, protect ourselves? We can isolate that asset. We can isolate that particular potential threat.
Interesting. There she is. I was going to say, did Megan go away?
Sorry, I have kindergartners barreling through the house looking for snacks. All right. Well, this has been ultra interesting. After having reviewed your website, I feel like, and listening to you, the mission for you is really to enable organizations to make the most of the data that's available. This is very uncharted territory, and I feel like you have to really bend your mind a little bit to really kind of even extrapolate the solutioning that could be potentially available. I imagine it's like when you started your career, you couldn't even conceptualize that the position you're in now would exist. And I
Right.
feel like we're kind of on the cusp with the data that's available around space, is that the solutioning that you're going to help customers enable, it might not even exist yet. And I feel like that's one of the challenges that I hear in your voice, is thinking critically about what can we do with this data? How can AI interact and enable this data that we have to think of what's next, not only with regard to national security, but it sounds like with regard to functionality and just kind of enabling humanity from that perspective.
Yeah. Well, you got it right, Megan. I think you hit on a really important point here, which is opening our mind and, thinking critically. You know, even 5 years ago, we were not thinking as openly and as broadly with the amount of imagination, real sense of this could be with regards to what we could do in space and from space. I mean, when you think about all the things that have changed in the last 5 years in terms of how we're appreciating the amount of capability that we can put in space and what we can do with all of that to advance life on Earth and also to advance things in space. That's all like new and open opportunity. But when we think about that, if we can open our mind to all these possibilities, we also have to open our mind to the possibilities that this could be at risk. This could be threatened. As much as the more we become reliant and enhanced, strengthened by a capability, the more it could potentially hurt us if we're overly dependent on it and not mindful of the risks and the threats. So we always have to be critical of, well, where could this be compromised? Where could the data be poisoned? What kind of models could be applied that would counter our understanding or our knowledge or our uncovering of the truth and create, mistruths? What are all the possibilities? And we're becoming, as humans, I think, more and more aware of that and figuring out ways to counter those problems. And I think that's extremely critical.
Yes, I was going to say, like, you want to think outside the box, but more outside the orbit.
Yes.
I'm really, really good with the bad jokes. I mean, I think this has been such an eye-opening and incredible conversation. And it's like, I know like Megan and I both have just been like spiraling out of areas we didn't even think about, and not many people do. And so thank you so much for joining us to talk about this and for our listeners to hear more and hopefully give them an opportunity to think more about things like this, because this is the future. Like AI is a step in the future, but it's going beyond that to infinity and beyond. All right, I'm going to stop with the space jokes.
No, it's all good.
So we like to end our segments with rapid fire questions. So most of them are kind of silly. We've kind of pulled them from our conversations, and really just quick, off the cuff answers. And so whenever you're ready, you just let me know.
Go for it.
Okay, so you served in both. So which would you choose, Air Force or Space Force?
Space Force.
Okay. Who are you going to be rooting for tomorrow, Army or Navy?
I guess Army.
Go Army, beat Navy. Awesome. Is there life in outer space?
There are a lot of unknowns about outer space. So I'm not going to say there isn't. There's a lot of things that we've yet to learn. We've seen water, so where there's water, who knows?
Exactly. All right, I like it. All right, this you might not even know this answer, but I thought about it when we were talking about cyber. But is there a hardware lifecycle refresh time frame for a satellite?
Yes.
Do you know what that is?
Well, it varies.
Okay.
On the component, on the hardware,
Okay.
but
Oh,
I mean, not every satellite is designed to stay in space forever.
okay. Something I would not have even thought about until we were kind of talking about the connecting stuff. And last and probably most important, so you can expand on this if you want, but what advice would you give a young woman considering a career in tech?
Don't let anything hold you back. There's nothing you can't do. I mean, technology is available to anybody that wants to pursue it. Go for it.
Awesome. I love
That's
that.
awesome. Kim, thank you so much for being
Yes.
here. This has been a pleasure. I would be lying if I said I even begin to understand the depth of the things that you're talking about, but I have researched myself quite a bit to even be able to have this conversation. And quite honestly, it's so interesting. I imagine I'll be looking into this a little bit more. It's, you know, Carly and I work for Microsoft, and that's, given we're one of the largest technology providers, I can't imagine that this is like too far in the distance before we're talking about space security products with our customers. So it really is kind of forcing me to expand my horizon, so to speak. Am I chiming in with the terrible jokes now? All right. This has been wonderful. Thanks for listening to Cocktails and Socktails, the podcast where we make cyber relevant to everyone and unlock the stories of our leading industry professionals.
And Kim, thank you again for joining us and sharing your experiences and knowledge of space and AI and cyber and how they all come together, and how they're shaping our future. And as you've challenged us, I challenge our listeners to think outside the orbit and go look into some of this stuff. You can find more details about Kim, Elara Nova, and beyond in the show notes. Cheers.
Cheers.